What's up, everybody? We're the Jank Divers, where we dive into the janky side of Commander. I'm Isaac.
And I'm Brent, and today we have Boros Landfall.
So our commander is Iros, God of Victory. 4 mana, 7/4, legendary and shaman creature. He has indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red and white is less than 7, he isn't a creature. Creatures you control have menace, and prevent all damage that would be dealt to attacking creatures you control.
This makes it very easy to attack with your creatures without fear of losing them in combat, obviously. But we have a lot of creatures in this deck with powerful attack triggers, which makes attacking without worrying about what they can block with more relevant than it would be normally.
So first up, we wanted to talk about ways to add lands to our hands. Now, Boros isn't known for being able to ramp quickly, but adding lands into your hand is fairly easy with cards like Land Tax and Thematic Compass or Gift of Estates. So just filling your hand up with lands is a pretty good way to make sure you hit your land for turn every turn, and also activate abilities of cards that let you discard lands for effects, and we'll get into that later.
The next kind of cards we want to talk about are just actual ramp. People tell you that you can't ramp in Boros, and you actually can, you just have to be a little bit creative. So Sword of the Animist is one of the best ramp pieces we have. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, you search your library for a basic land card and put it out onto the battlefield tapped. And we have a lot of synergies with attacking in this deck, so we can get a lot more value out of this card than we normally would. But even by itself, it's still great. Walking Atlas, we can tap it to put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. This is pretty good early game just by itself. And late game, you'll see later, we have some ways to untap it, which can let us really take advantage of the landfall ability on some of our cards. Keeper of the Accord, at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if they have more creatures than you, you can create a 1/1 token. We care about tokens a little bit in this deck, so that's pretty nice. And at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if they have more lands than you, you can search your library for a basic plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So that green deck that ramped out like 30 lands on turn 4, you can match it a little bit. Not quite as quickly as they can, but it's Boros, what you're going to do. And then Core Cartographer, when it enters, you can get any plains card and put it out there tapped. So you could tutor up a Sacred Foundry or another non-basic card with the plains subtype.
We also wanted to talk about other ways to use your lands. So discarding your lands for effects is a really powerful way to generate an advantage. So Magmatic Insight is discard a land, draw 2 cards for 1 mana, just let you dig through a little bit. Sen's Enlistment has Retrace, so you can cast it from your graveyard as long as you discard a land. You get 2 1/1 white soldier tokens, which again, we care about tokens, as you'll see later on. We also have Cavalier Flames, which we can toss some of those extra lands with its Enter the Battlefield effect, discarding some cards and drawing some cards. And when it dies, it's going to deal X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of lands in your graveyard. So if you're discarding a bunch of lands and then Cavalier of Flame dies, you can just hit your opponent for a lot of damage sometimes. And Teutonic Reformation just lets all your lands have cycling. So later, when you don't need to be making your land drop for every turn, you can start discarding cards off a land tax to just really dig for cards that you actually want.
Now we have cards that can get lands out of our graveyard. We just mentioned how we're discarding a lot of our lands for benefits, but we can get them back afterwards. Planar Birth brings back all basic lands from all graveyards under their opponent's control tapped. If you have any landfall cards out and you play this with even just 4 basic lands in your graveyard, that can lead to some very powerful situations. And obviously, like super late game, you could have like 20 land cards in your graveyard or something silly, and you can just win instantly. We also have Crucible of Worlds. You can play land cards from your graveyard. Pretty simple. If you don't have any lands in your hand, you can just play one from your graveyard. Scare Tiller. Whenever he becomes tapped, which for us basically means whenever he attacks, you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, or return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So ramps you a little bit, gets lands out of your graveyard, just an all-around useful card.
So we also have some other ways to get cards out of our graveyards. So Trove Warden and Sun Titan, both of them are able to get lands back as well, but they are also able to get other stuff out. Also, Irelia Shepherd. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return any non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Or if it was a plains, you can return the non-land permanent to the battlefield instead. So that can get some of our bigger cards. It can't get back lands, but that's okay.
Also, when people tell you that Boros can't draw cards like Trove Warden and all these that get stuff out of your graveyard, even though they don't really say draw a card, they kind of accomplish a very similar thing, especially if you discarded something on turn 1 to like the Magmatic Insight, for example, and then you can just get it back later. You've effectively just drawn another card. Here we have our token makers. Now, we have more token makers in our deck, and these 4 are some of the better ones that also happen to work off of Landfall, so can be pretty abusable when we're ramping. Retreat to Emeria and Felidar Retreat, both when we play a land, either puts out a token or gives our tokens some sort of team-wide buff, which can help break through when the board is all gummed up, or can just help if you can get out a lot of lands in one turn, can just make you kill somebody instantly. Emeria Angel makes 1/1 flying creatures, which are always nice to have around. And then Nesting Dragon, whenever you play a land, it makes a 0/2 red dragon egg with Defender, and then when it dies, you get a 2/2 red dragon with flying, and you can pay a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So spitting out a lot of those tokens can be very dangerous, and the fact that they come out as eggs for first gives you some board wipe insurance. Also notably, our commander grants all of our creatures menace, so when we're attacking with a large number of creatures and our opponent has to send 2 creatures to block one of ours, you can overwhelm people very fast.
Also, we have some token payoffs. So Fireflux Squad, whenever it attacks, you're going to exile a target attacking creature you control. And if you do, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, and you get to put that card on the battlefield tapped and attacking. So you're just going to create tokens, attack with Fireflux Squad, and then you're going to polymorph it into a different creature. So you're basically turning your tokens into card advantage this way. Reality Scramble does a similar thing, but it has Retrace as well, so you can keep doing it. And of course, Skull Clamp, the classic, just turn those 1/1s into 2 cards for 1 mana. Very powerful.
Here we have our extra combat step cards. So you've noticed in our deck we have a lot of cards that benefit on attack, and these extra combat step cards really let us abuse those abilities, especially in conjunction with our commander, making attacking very easy. So Morag, Fury of Akum, one of the new cards from Zendikar Rising. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn, which is pretty nice. But more importantly, whenever we play a land, if it's during our main phase, we get an additional combat phase after this. And after that combat, it also untaps all of our creatures. So if you can send out like 2 or 3 lands before you attack, then you can just attack like 3 or 4 times in one turn, which can, as I'm sure you can tell, get out of hand very fast. Ways of Aggression, definitely one of the better ones in the deck. Just gives you another combat phase, but it has Retrace, so you can reuse this again and again. Lightning Runner has Double Strike and Haste, and whenever it attacks, you get 2 energy counters. Then if you have 8, you can pay 8 energy and get another combat phase. So this one works really well in conjunction with our other extra combat phase cards. Kind of helps you keep your extra combat train going. And then combat celebrant, if it hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. And an exerting creature just means that it won't untap during your next untap step. And when you exert it, you untap all other creatures you control and get another combat step. And again, all of these creatures and anything else we attack with are safe because of our commander, so we don't have to worry about the damage to our creatures stacking up over the multiple combat phases we have.
So we also have a couple combat-based infinite combos. So if you have an opponent that can't block for whatever reason, then you can activate Bazriket's -2 ability whenever you attack with one or more non-token creatures. You create that many 1/1 tokens that are also tapped and attacking. So if you have Breath of Fury and it gets through, you sacrifice that creature and to put it onto one of the token creatures. Then when that token creature attacks the next combat step, you get to sacrifice it and move it on to the next token. And as long as you're attacking with a non-token creature, you're going to keep creating at least one creature token every time you attack. So it allows you to go infinite and just beat that person down until they're dead.
Also, in non-combo scenarios, if for whatever reason you can't stick your commander, Bazriket can make a creature indestructible. So that can be kind of nice if you really need to get an attack trigger in safely. The other combo we have is Irelia the War Leader with Helm of the Host. So Irelia has Flying, Vigilance, and Haste, and it's a 3/4. And whenever it attacks for the first time, untap all creatures you control and you get an extra combat phase. And then Helm of the Host is a equipment that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary and the token gains haste. So if we equip a Helm of the Host onto Irelia the War Leader, at the start of combat, it will create a clone, and we attack with the clone of Irelia, and this will give us an extra combat step. Even if they can block the Irelia, you can just repeatedly attack with infinite Irelia clones, plus, whatever other creatures you have on the board. And because our creatures don't sustain damage and probably also have menace because of our commander, we can just swing the Irelia clone into our opponent's board no matter how big it is, and eventually the damage will stack up until they eventually run out of blockers and die, because you can just make infinity angel clones. You can also do this exact same combo with Combat Celebrant. You just only attack with the clone version, and in both combos you never attack with the creature that has the equipment on it, just to be sure.
Okay. Since we're attacking a lot due to our extra combat steps, we also included some other attack triggers. Smuggler Copter lets you draw a card and discard a card whenever it attacks. So doing that multiple times a turn, very good, lets you find what you need. Slab Hammer lets you pick a land back up and buff your creature a little bit. Again, the buff is a lot more helpful because you're attacking multiple times a turn sometimes. But the land back to your hand is also very useful if you're lacking a land to activate your Landfall abilities. Captain's Claws just puts out a 1/1 every time it attacks. And Parhelion II, just an absolute broken attack trigger. 2 4/4 White Angel tokens with Flying and Vigilance that are also attacking. Attacking with that even 2 or 3 times during a turn is enough to completely swing the game in your favor.
Next up, we also have card draw. So again, when people tell you you can't draw cards in Boros, you just have to get a little creative. So Mangara, the Diplomat, is a 4-mana 2/4 with lifelink. Whenever an opponent attacks with 2 or more creatures, if they're attacking you or your planeswalkers, draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. And then next up, we have Nahiri's Lithoforming. So it's double red and X, and you sacrifice X lands, and for each land sacrificed this way, draw a card. You may play X additional lands this turn. Lands you control enter the battlefield tapped. So this card can just be crazy if you have a Planar Birth or Crucible of Worlds out on the field. So say you pay like 5, sacrifice 5 of your lands, draw 5 cards, and then return them all with either Planar Birth or Crucible of Worlds. Or if you have more lands in your hand, you can sacrifice some of your lands and then, play lands from your hand and then Planar Birth and get the rest back from your graveyard. There's a lot of interesting lines of play with this card. Endless Atlas, just a nice card draw if you have 3 plains or 3 mountains. And then Seer Sundial, it has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you can pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. Just a nice engine for us.
We also wanted to bring up one of the most powerful board wipes in our deck, Starstorm. So if you go ahead and attack with all of your creatures, you can play a massive Starstorm, and you're going to deal a ton of damage to all the creatures. But since our commander prevents all damage that would be dealt to attacking creatures, our creatures are going to be safe from the board wipe, where everybody else's are going to take the damage. It also has cycling if you don't need it.
You do need to play this before your opponent declares blockers, though, or else your creatures will still be blocked. But if you play it before blockers are declared and you kill all their stuff, your creatures are also unblocked and can get in for a ton of damage. So next up, we wanted to talk about some non-basic lands. First up, Emeria the Sky Rune. It enters tapped and can tap for a white. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if you control 7 or more planes, you may return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. This helps us when we have to discard creatures early on, and just helps us with the card advantage and card draw portion of Boros in general. Next, we have Field of the Dead, which enters tapped and can tap for colorless. And whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie. This card can get out of hand very fast, as our deck is able to tutor up non-basic lands. So hitting that 7 different lands with different names is easy. We also have some snow-covered mountains and plains in our deck in addition to normal ones. So we can hit 4 different names with just basic lands. And Field of the Dead can just make a lot of tokens very fast, and it's hard to get rid of due to being a land. Next up, we have Terrain Generator, which taps for a colorless, and then you can pay 2 and tap it to put a basic land card from your hand into play tapped. Very nice for ramping earlier on if we need to. Can also activate landfall abilities at instant speed, which can be particularly useful with token cards or landfall effects that buff our creatures. There's a number of applications for it. Next we have Castle Ardenvale. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control the plains. Taps for a white, and then we can pay 4 and tap to create a 1/1 white human creature token. Very useful effect to have on a land.
We also get to use some of the new flip lands. So these are a land on the back half and a useful spell on the front half. So Undo Inversion for 8 mana, destroy all non-land permanents, which is a little expensive, but it's worth it because if you need the land, you can just play the land half. Valakut Awakening is card draw. Very powerful with land tax because you're filling up your hands with basic land cards, and then you can just put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many +1. So any lands that you have tutored up and put in your hand that you want traded out for real cards, you can just ship them away and get new cards in their place. Also, it's a land on the back half, so if you're just looking for lands at the moment, just play the land half. We have a couple of fetch lands. We're just playing some budget ones. Obviously, if you have the money or already have them, you can add some of the more expensive fetch lands. But fetch lands are very, very powerful in landfall decks because you get to trigger the landfall effects twice a turn, at least. So fetches are very important. Mistvale Plains, a lot of cards say that you can find any plains, so not only is this a plains with a different name for Field of the Dead, but it also has the added ability of getting cards from our graveyard and putting them on the bottom of your library. So we are shuffling our deck a lot, so you can shuffle those cards back in and hopefully draw them earlier than the last card of the game. But it's also very, very useful for our retrace cards. If somebody tries to exile our graveyard, in response, we can just target it and put it back onto the bottom of our library so we can hopefully draw it again later.
So that's going to be it for Boros Landfall. We're going to have the deck list in the description. We didn't go over every card, so if you want to see the full list, it'll be there. Feel free to comment if you thought there were any cards we should have added but we didn't, or if there's cards that you think we should take out. Also, the first person who can guess the card art of the picture we use for the background will get their comment featured in the next video. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more, and thanks for watching.